Mary Fallin, who we've invited to discuss her State of the State address, government transparency, and current legislation. When you get to ask questions at the end, please raise your hand and wait to be called upon. According to her official biography, Governor Fallin has signed bills to modernize and streamline government operations, responsibly cut the income tax, increase compensation for public employees, and address the state's physically unstable pension system. The governor also has signed into law historic lawsuit reform and a complete overhaul of the state's workers' compensation system. At Governor Fallin's direction, the state has increased funding for K through 12 education by over $154 million, putting more money into the classroom and helping to boost student performance. As the former chairman of the National Governors Association, Governor Fallin led a nationwide initiative, America Works, Education and Training for Tomorrow's Jobs, seeking to better align education with 21st century workforce needs. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our governor of the great state of Oklahoma, Mary Fallin. Good to see you, Governor. Thank you for coming. You're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, welcome. It's always wonderful to have you here at the Capitol. Thank you so much for coming. I think this year we're going to give you a lot to report on, which is always a good thing because we want you guys to be successful. And let me just first of all say thank you. I appreciate Robbie's kind introduction. It's always great to see you. And thank you to all of our press across the state and all that you do to produce our local papers, to get out information, and how important your job is. I'm one of these people that still gets up in the morning and reads the paper every day. And my staff probably laughs at me, but I like to keep copies of things. I cut out articles and papers. I have files of articles on education, corrections, tax reform, whatever the issue might be. But I really appreciate the news that you guys provide and how you keep our public educated. And certainly it's important to get information out to our various policy officials here at the Capitol, too, so that they can get information. So thank you for all that you do. I want to just start out by talking to you a little bit about where we're at as a state. As all of you know, I gave my State of the State address last week to the legislature. I told many people that this is the year of action, that we have deep challenges facing us as a state because of the energy downturn and many other issues going on around the world. And I think our most serious issue that we have to deal with this year is the budget itself and being able to provide core critical services to our people and to be able to balance the budget. And we need to roll up our sleeves, do the hard work, have a bold conversation about what's really important to our citizens and how we're going to accomplish these goals. And so I gave, I think, a pretty bold speech last Monday when I laid out my plans for the year and how we address some of the challenges that we're facing right now. And it is a very challenging time. If I think back to 5 years ago when I came into office in 2011, we were just coming out of the national recession that started back 2008, 2009, 2010. State of Oklahoma during that time period, which I was a member of Congress, had faced years, not just one, but years, where we had $1 billion shortfall, much like what we're facing today. We had at that time just a little under a 7% unemployment rate, so unemployment rate was higher than what it is right now. We had $2.03 in our bank account when I took office. You've heard me say that many times, in 2011. We worked very hard over my last 5 years to grow our economy, create jobs, create a more business-friendly climate in our state so that we could be attractive to expanding jobs and retaining jobs and growing new jobs in Oklahoma and moving businesses to our state. We worked very hard to help our businesses and their bottom line so that they could be able to, once again, expand. So we passed very important pieces of legislation for lawsuit reform to reduce our frivolous lawsuits in our state, made tremendous strides in that. Our rankings as a state has greatly improved. We passed a major overhaul of our workers' compensation system to help our businesses with their bottom lines so they can hire more people, expand their services, expand their companies, and certainly hopefully pay their employees more in our state. Workers' compensation premium costs are down somewhere around 37% in our state. So we know that the plan we put in place a couple of years ago was a difficult process, but it made a difference while also protecting injured workers, which is very important to me too. We knew that we needed to address our unfunded liability systems our unfunded liability in our pension systems. So we have 7 pension systems in our state. We had about a $16 billion unfunded liability for those. Put in place many different pieces of pension reform. We dropped that by 1/2 in 5 years. Actually, 1/2 even faster than that, in about 4 years. So now our unfunded liability in our pension systems have dropped from $16 billion down to around $8 billion. One time it was down around 7, but with the economy doing what it's doing, it hurts also the stock market, which affects our pensions and their earnings. So we've done things like that to address many of the fiscal issues that we have to deal with in our state. We certainly made improvements in education, lots of different bills that we passed to improve the quality, hold people accountable, put programs in place to make sure that we offer quality education to our students. And once we were able to turn the economy around, which took some years to do that, we were able to put more money into education, which I thought was very important for our state, because I hear educators, I hear parents, and I know that education is the most critical thing we must do to help us build a stronger, more vibrant economy in our state, to have a quality education system that all of our children must have, and frankly that we deserve in our state. So very committed to that. All that being said, that just up until about 18 months ago, when the energy sector took a downturn, we had the 4th fastest growing economy in the nation in Oklahoma. Our per capita income had grown at twice the national rate of growth, and we had seen over 100,000 new jobs added to Oklahoma's economy. But today, after 18 months of an energy downturn that's caused by many things, worldwide pressures, whether it's things going on in Saudi Arabia, whether it's things going on with OPEC, the China market slowing down, manufacturing slowing down worldwide, challenges in European nations with all the immigrants they're seeing coming into their economies, to just general federal policy that affects our states. And we're seeing a downturn. And I tell all that story to say, I've been here before, we've turned it around before, and we can do it again. Is it pleasant? Absolutely not. Do I wish we weren't having to deal with an energy downturn and other things that are affecting our economy? Absolutely. But we're up to the challenge. We can do it. We're a great state. We're great people. We have smart, capable people here at the state capitol, certainly throughout the state of Oklahoma. And we'll get through this, and we'll come out stronger. So my number one goal in laying out my state address was to lay out a plan for the future with specifics for solutions for solving our problems that we're facing today, and to challenge the legislature to do the hard work. I got to do the hard work as governor. They have to come along with me for me to be able to accomplish these things. It's a 3-legged stool. It's me and House and Senate. And so I got to have cooperation to be able to address these issues that we're facing. And we can, and I said we will do that. And so in my State of the State speech, I talked a lot about the budget. I talked about different revenue streams that we have coming in to fund state government itself. I talked about the revenue projections that we're now seeing, and certainly we were disappointed that December sales tax collections and all revenue sources for the most part were down 13%, which is a big challenge for our state. And just to remind you that when we started working on our budget over a year ago, the price of oil was higher, and so our revenue projections for oil and gas in a price of a barrel of oil was around $57 a barrel, which we've gotten down, I think, at one point this week, down around 26 or so. It fluctuates every day, as all of you know. So we projected our budget beginning in July of last year when the fiscal year started through the fall at around $57, but once again it had been up to $107 at one point in time, just not too long before that, and gradually showing decreases. And then, of course, we got down to where the price of a barrel of oil was at $30, and then down in the $20 range. And we're still not real sure where it's going to go as a nation or even as the world. We're not real sure about that either. So when we began our projections for our budget, we gradually saw the price of a barrel of oil come down. We saw incomes coming down. We saw sales tax collections coming down. We saw gross production tax collections coming down, all the different revenue sources that we have. And thus December came in 13% below. We got our January projections, and we will have our Board of Equalization meeting on Tuesday. But the January projections came in at around 17% below, much steeper than what we anticipated. And I tell you all that history about the price of a barrel of oil because last fall, the price of a barrel of oil was still hovering around $40-something in July and August and October. Now, beginning January, and even starting in December certainly, we're seeing oil around the late 20s to 30. It fluctuates a lot, as all we know. But we're just now in the second half of our fiscal budget year, which means that looking from January at 17% below revenue estimates to February coming up, March, April, May, June, still the rest of the year, that when those prices continue at that lower market rate, it's going to really affect the budget. And so it's important right now that the legislature, and certainly I've called upon them with my ideas, to strategically look at what's really important for the state, whether it's education in our school systems, our public safety with our prisons, looking at infrastructure needs, which are always critical, to our health and human services departments in our state, that we prioritize our spending and frankly even prioritize our cuts. When we had our December revenue failure, it automatically made us cut 3% to the agencies, which is hard to do when you only have 6 months left in the fiscal year to make those cuts. But in light of the fact that we just saw January come in a lot less than December, it means that probably when we have our meeting, in fact more, not probably, but we will, next week when we have a Board of Equalization, have to make further cuts. There are some at the Capitol that would like to just see the cut be automatic and not make any hard decisions. Just say, let the Office of Finance declare that there's another failure in revenue in January, so just make another across-the-board cut. I don't favor that. I think it's important for the legislature to do their work, and I know there are many that are willing to do the hard work. They've told me that. To make targeted cuts, but there will have to be cuts. When you're facing $1 billion and probably plus, next Tuesday, shortfall, it's important that we strategically look at where we want to fund things. And so I'm calling on the legislature to work with me, and I know Speaker Hickman has told me personally that the House is ready to step up and to help draft legislation right now, early on in the session, to deal with where do we want to make strategic cuts to agencies. In other words, in my budget, I tried to give education more money. In the area of corrections reform, I put more money for corrections. You saw the articles in the paper today. You know how many challenges we have in our corrections systems in our state prisons. I want to keep the public safe. So I actually asked the legislature to put more money towards corrections, more money towards education, teachers' pay raises. I held flat or minimal cuts to many of our important key service agencies that deal with people who are struggling, and other agencies, which you saw in my budget. But the legislature can do that right now versus letting us just have an across-the-board another cut, whatever that might be, based upon the projections. And that way we can make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing in our state. I also challenge them to look at our different revenue streams that we have in our state. And Michael, I think you have some boards here that we'll talk about real quickly. I don't know which order you have them, but you just take them all off. And I'm just going to show you these because I think it's important to have what I call truth in budgeting, it's almost like truth in sentencing, truth in budgeting. You know, where's our money really go? Where is it? What's the revenue streams that we have? And I'll start out by talking, I'll just talk about the revolving funds. I can see that up here. One of the things I asked the legislature to do was to look at our revolving fund streams of money and to take a percentage of those to help us balance our budget. Revolving funds are monies that are appropriated for their fees or their licenses or different revenue sources that we collect that every year come back with a balance. And typically we've called this one-time funding when we've taken money out of our revolving funds to put into different categories of appropriations in our state budget. But as you can see, I put it back to 2011 when I started in office, year after year, these revolving funds replenish. But we call them one-time funds when we take it out of the revolving funds and we put it into the appropriations process. So I've asked them, let's look at the revolving fund balances, and we can find a portion of that we can take in and put it back into the base of our appropriations. You've heard me say many times that there's so much money taken off the top, and I think there's a chart here, I think it is, of money taken off the chart at the top of our budget, that the legislature only has about 45 cents of every dollar that we collect that they can appropriate. They can make decisions about where they want to spend that. And we have $8 billion of money that comes off the top that's already dedicated. And I'm not saying they're bad things they're dedicated to. Many of them are extremely important. But surely we can find money in the off the top money, the $8 billion, to be able to put back into the budget for appropriations so that they don't have 45 cents of the dollar to appropriate, but hopefully we start turning the curve and getting it back to an honest budget about how much money we really have and where it's at. And bring that number back up 50%, 60% of the money that they would be able to decide, because priorities change every year. If you have a shortage of correction officers, or if you have a federal lawsuit with DHS, and DHS has to hire more social workers, which we did, or if you have a teacher shortage, and you need to spend more money on education, then you need to be able to move that money around. But if you only have 45 cents of every dollar that you can appropriate through the process here at the Capitol, that really ties your hands as a legislator or as a governor. And it's like your paycheck. You know, you have your gross amount that you get, and then you have your net amount, that's the easiest way to explain it, that you get, and you have all these things that you got to pay before you finally see that final amount hit your checkbook and your bank account that you can spend on your groceries or your car payment or your house payment or college or whatever it might be. All that money coming off the top with Social Security, health care, federal tax, state tax, whatever it is that you have deducted from your paycheck. Same thing with our appropriation process. All this money is out there in different pockets and different pools and spent in different ways, but I think it's time that we restructure how we do our budget so we don't have budget shortfalls when we actually have money in different areas. And then I talked about sales tax exemptions up there too. And certainly, I've got my charts mixed up, here we go, sales tax exemption, oh, it was down there. That we can look at our different sources of revenue that we can utilize, and as you can see, we usually appropriate about $6.9 billion of our budget, but we have the $8 billion that comes off the top. But if you added those two things together, that's close to $15 billion, really, that we have in the state budget. So what I've asked the legislature to do is to look at these things. I made specific solutions about where they could take different pockets of money to get into the base of the budget so that we can look at education, corrections, health, human services, transportation type issues, and be able to address our budget. The other thing that is of concern to me is that we got to be really, really careful at the Capitol when we're talking about our incentives. This deals with sales tax exemptions. This deals with our revolving funds. I gotta look see what all my charts are here. And that's our, that's our 45 cents on the dollar chart that we have. I cautioned the legislature yesterday because they had a bill that was going through one of our bodies that would propose specific changes to some of our incentives for job attraction, job creation. And by the time I went to an event last night that was business owners from across the state and heard many of them tell me, look, the legislature is mentioning things like historic building tax credits. They're talking about the aerospace engineers tax credit, which was the first bill I signed into law years ago. And they're talking about doing away with those things or just having a moratorium. I actually heard businesses come up to me last night at the State Chamber reception saying, hey, we had a project online, and now they're pulling back saying, wait a minute, the Oklahoma legislature is looking at doing this or doing that. And we're not sure that our corporate office is calling from wherever it is and saying, what's going on in Oklahoma? And we may not consider coming to Oklahoma now if we have so much uncertainty within the business climate. Now, I signed a law that put into place a committee to review all of our tax incentives, tax credits for businesses. It has a process in a committee that will start meeting February 25th. And it has people who are experts in finances, whether they're CPAs, auditors, different categories of business that will review those things, and they're going to give the legislature back a report. But they haven't done their job yet. And I do think we should review those things. And I do think we should look at which areas in which incentives create jobs, which ones create investments, and which ones don't. And if they don't create jobs and they don't create investments, and that's fair game to talk about whether we should really have that or not. Last year we made an adjustment to the wind tax credit. We made an adjustment to gross production tax credit incentives, various incentives that we have. So I just think we should be very cautious at a time when I'm out there trying to recruit as many jobs as we can. It's a full court press so we can get through this energy downturn and bring more jobs and opportunities and investment to our state. But we got to be careful with our wording here at the Capitol. Yes, we should look at everything, but just be careful that we do no harm at a time when we have your local community chambers out there that are trying to close deals. Then those deals are being put on hold while we figure out the Capitol what we're going to be doing. So I want to just mention that because there's a lot of important work that we have to do here at the Capitol. You heard me talk a lot about education, wanting to give teachers a pay raise. I laid out a very specific plan, looking at all of our different revenue sources, prioritizing our spending, having targeted cuts at various agencies. I talked about our different sales tax systems. I talked about raising the tax on cigarettes. It's an option. People want to smoke, they can. If they don't want to, that's fine too. But one of the biggest ways we can improve our health in our state is to continue to lower the smoking rates in our state. It's the number one preventable cause of death in the state of Oklahoma is cardiac-related smoking diseases. So we can make a difference in the health of our state. I talked about some of the things that were exempt from sales tax, whether we could broaden our sales tax base because there are a lot of things that are exempt and we're in a service-based economy these days, and maybe we could even lower our sales tax in the state of Oklahoma if we had a broader base. And I'm not going to give you any specifics on which ones, because I've asked the legislature to do the hard work, but that's something we can consider. And looking at those things. Talked about certainly corrections reform and our high incarceration rate within our state prisons. I'm pleased that the legislature passed a key piece of legislation yesterday to look at some of our corrections reform ideas. We absolutely want to keep people that we're scared of and that are dangerous in prison, but we also know that we're at around 120% capacity in our prisons. We know we have a 35% turnover rate with prison guards, correction officers in our state, which is a big challenge for us. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to give our district attorneys more leeway in sentencing nonviolent offenders. It's a pretty bold step. And I'll ask you this too. One of the things I've been talking to the legislature about, does anybody in this room not know someone that has a substance abuse problem that is not dangerous? Anybody not have a relative? I know you're not going to nod your head. A friend? A coworker? Someone you know? Now, I'm not talking about somebody that's habitually addicted to something and just totally out of their mind. Those people need to be put away. But someone that just has maybe a prescription drug problem that needs some help. How can we better address those issues? I mean, we all know those people. But those that are dangerous, I want to make it very clear, we'll keep them locked up and give them the services that they need. But we also need to find a better way to help people who have substance abuse issues in our state. The third thing we talked about, let's see, corrections, education, the budget itself. I think about got all that covered. Health, I mentioned about smoking. Those are some of the key issues that I've been talking about for the last couple of years, things that hold us back as a state. So we got a lot of work to do. It's going to be a very challenging year this year with our state budget. But if we roll up our sleeves, make hard decisions, do the tough work, certainly there's a lot of different groups coming around the Capitol, circling the wagons. You know, go touch that guy's thing, but don't touch mine in my backyard. But it's critical if we're going to continue to have a prosperous state that we lay a more solid foundation for our budget and our priorities, the things that are really important to us, and to be able to sort through that and prioritize our spending in the state. So I gave you a lot of stuff. I'll stop right there, and Robbie would be happy to take some questions. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't mention it, but I will. Good press guys always want you to say, hey, did you forget one thing here? Thank you, Michael. Michael just wanted me to mention, I mentioned about the evaluation committee for tax incentives that we have in our state, and we have appointed a gentleman. In fact, I talked to him last night. He's on the board. Some of you have asked what took so long. The bill went into effect in January. They have to have the report by the end of December, but the legislation was written very narrow by our legislators to who my appointee could be, that frankly I had to interview a lot of people before I could find one person that didn't have a conflict. It had to be an auditor that didn't do business with certain businesses and would have not received any incentives, and it was hard to find that right person who had the CPA experience, the auditor experience, and frankly I offered some and they just said, no, I don't have time to do it. So we got that person in place, and the first meeting, as I said, will be February 25th, and we're looking forward to seeing what their recommendations will be. Okay. Sure, absolutely. No, I gave you a lot of stuff.
You talk a lot about off-the-top money and how that could be a potential revenue source, but I don't hear a lot of specifics on exactly what off-the-top money you would dedicate to it.
What off-the-top money I'm talking about, or where it would go, or both?
There is money that goes off the top and is not available for regular appropriation.
Right.
And that's often regarded as a pool that would be better available to the legislators to appropriate. what funds in particular, that a lot of that goes to roads, a lot of it goes to education. Is there money there that's
well, let me
pulled out of there that you can identify?
absolutely, Rick. That's a fair question. And the reason why I didn't give a list of things is because you got $8.1 billion or so that comes off. And you got money, as I said, everywhere. But the reason is because I want the legislature to do the hard work and to work with me. And if I go out and say, I'm going to tap this, this, and this, and this, then all of a sudden I've got all these different special interest groups coming to the Capitol trying to kill it. And we got to get a budget done. We got to make decisions out here. And it's going to be tough closing $1 billion budget shortfall. But in general, I will tell you that some of the money, the off-the-top money, are things I think should continue to go to those sources such as education, such as health, such as on our roads and bridges, important things. I've said those are all priorities for the state of Oklahoma. There are things I think we shouldn't be touching, but I'm leaving it open because I want people to have an honest, true discussion and not be timid about tackling these tough issues and not all of a sudden bickering and fighting over these things the first week of the legislative session because I mentioned a very specific thing. I want them to have a true debate about this and to work with me. But if I would have said last Monday that this is a thing we're going to talk about, I've had different groups out here fighting me from day one. Now I got to do the hard work this year. Good to see you.
Removal of sales tax exemptions, doesn't that just equate to a tax increase for the citizens? Because people are buying the services or whatever, going to dentists, making sales tax, that's just a tax increase. I mean, for the public.
Well, and it depends on how you want to look at that, John, and yes, there would be, if we're talking about removing exemptions, then there would be a tax put on whatever that might be. And that's one of the other reasons why I left it pretty open, because there's a long list of things. I think if you, and Michael, if you can, I was talking to Michael this morning about getting that list. You can see it yourself of things you might be surprised that are exempt. And what I'm asking the legislature to do is to have that debate. Let's look at what we're doing in our state. If you want to fund education, if you want to keep our prisons staffed so we're safe as a community, if you want to have good roads and bridges, if you want to be able to provide the type of mental health services that we all talk about, or take care of the poor and the needy, we've got to look at how do you fill a $1 billion shortfall in our state. So there's a long list of exemptions that are out there. There are different entities that do pay tax on their services, and there are entities that don't. So what's the fair thing to do? And that's what I'm asking them to do, is review these things. And just because we've been doing it this way for 50, 60 years doesn't mean it's the right thing to do today. And the other thing I mentioned in my speech was we live in a different world than what we've ever lived in. I mean, especially even since I came into office 25 years ago. I mean, back when I came into office, we didn't shop online. I mentioned about shopping online and how it's had an effect upon our municipalities and upon our small businesses and our retailers. I like to shop online. My kids all shop online. I mean, I'm sure all you guys shop for something online. But the fact of the matter is that we think we might have lost somewhere close to possibly $200 million this past year from people shopping online. And certainly when we had an ice storm around Thanksgiving, we had an ice storm around Christmas. A lot of people didn't get out and go shopping. And it hurts our retailers, it hurts our municipalities trying to pay for fire and police and all the different services. And you're seeing Oklahoma City and Tulsa and our rural communities without the funding they need to be able to provide essential services in our communities. I mean, somebody's got to have a solution to these problems. So what I'm trying to do is to get people looking at all the different revenue streams. If you want to give teachers a pay raise, then let's go look for money. If you want to make sure that our prisons are safe, let's go look for money. If you want to fix your bridges between our different communities, we got to have the money. But on the other hand, we got to make sure we do no harm to where we don't cause businesses to take us off their list as a place that they're considering. So I'm trying to really get us as a state to focus on our structural issues within our budget, consider how things have changed with the invention of the internet and how we consume things and do business in our state, and just to have a discussion about that.
That question from Lou.
Thank you for bringing the question. Rachel Baker from we have talked a little bit about education and education spending. I've done quite a bit of writing lately about education and what we're spending per child, and especially with rural schools. But I'm curious, we talk a lot about kind of lightening the administrative load in the education sector, but I also see a lot of the administrative load in some of the states. Are we looking at that? Are we considering that?
Well, and thank you for reminding me. I didn't mention about that, one of the core issues of my speech on Monday. But, I challenged the legislature to look at our administrative costs and how we can create more efficiencies, more effectiveness, and better utilize our limited resources to really do the things we want to do, which is to pay teachers more, to provide a quality education to all children in the state of Oklahoma. And so I asked them to look at starting with, because there are lots of different bills out here, as you know, there are a lot of bills talking about schools and how many districts should we have. But I asked them to look at our dependent schools, which, by the way, are in both metro areas and rural areas. Now, some people have said they're only in rural areas. That's not true. We have dependent schools in metro areas, too. But we have some underperforming schools that are dependent schools, and I mentioned very specifically underperforming schools, very specific. And I said we should look at, is there a better way of doing that to where we can merge it with better performing K through 12 schools to help with their administrative costs. And what does that mean? That means looking at your payroll processing system, your purchasing, your administration. And if you got a failing school, why wouldn't you want to fix that? Does anybody want their child to go to a failing school? So if the school's having a problem, and say another school 2 or 3 miles down the street has a great CFO that really knows how to manage money and how to do things really good, wouldn't you want to have that top-level expert advice helping you with your administration of your schools? And so you're seeing a lot of bills this year talking about all kinds of education reform. I'm open to looking at all of it, because with $1 billion shortfall and wanting to pay teachers more and wanting to make sure we get the best education possible, I think it's critical we do that this year. And some people say, well, why hasn't the legislature done it before? Well, it takes a lot of guts to address these issues. And there's an old saying that says, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a crisis, and we should not let it go to waste. It provides us an opportunity to do the things we talk about doing, maybe not out in public, but we all talk about doing, so let's get some of these things done. We have to.
I'm also with the Express Star. When you talk about smoking, accidental cigarettes, a lot of times you see these used as they actually give people an incentive to stop smoking. There's a lot of
Right.
campaigns across Oklahoma to get people to stop smoking. So there's a balance there. Where is that balance? Is Oklahoma, should we be more interested in stopping people from smoking, or should we be more interested in their money?
Well, my goal is to improve the health of Oklahoma. And you heard me say earlier that the number one preventable disease that we can help improve the health of our whole state is to reduce smoking in our state. And we've actually made great progress in that area. I mean, it's not been a secret that my first couple of years in here, I did several things. I signed executive orders to ban smoking on state property. I closed a smoking room in the Capitol and put in a small exercise room with the YMCA, which people actually do use. I've actually used it myself. You're welcome to try it out yourself too. But the key thing is that year after year after year, we are all seeing, as Oklahomans, our health care premium costs go up. I think I read that one of our major carriers had a 35% increase in their insurance premiums. I don't know about you guys, but that's a huge burden on families when their insurance premiums keep going up, their deductibles keep going up. Our Medicaid costs are one of our fastest rising costs in our state, and certainly for every governor in the nation. And so how can we improve our health? And I'm tired of being 46 in the nation on health outcomes. We've moved the needle on many things as it relates to health, and we're doing better. But the number one thing that dings us on our overall health as a state is smoking on those cards, even though we're making progress in other areas. So that's my solution. I lost both my parents to smoking-related diseases. My dad died when he was younger than me. My mother got sick at 73. And so to me, it's a way that we can hopefully improve the quality of life for everybody in Oklahoma.
Paul Long with the GOP record. Governor, unfortunately, you're not the first governor that's had to tenure through a boom and bust. And I guess my question is, when you talk about the exemption, all the things you talked about in your state, why is it that we would pit interest groups against interest groups, people that have had exemptions since statehood, and be looking at that, which would be a tax increase? And then also talking about like closing schools through consolidation. Instead of that, what is so immoral about a broad-based tax revenue, even if it's temporary, that we all would pay as Oklahomans? Every group, everybody, income, sales, that we all pay. What's so immoral about looking at that? Because a tax increase is a tax increase.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is to get everybody looking at all of our revenue sources in our state. And what is fair? Is it fair that this person gets an exemption and this person doesn't? So that's what I'm asking the legislature to do. Look at money off the top. You got $15 billion or so dollars sitting here. We have a $6 billion budget. You have revolving funds of $1.5 million. You see the general revenue that goes for appropriations here below me. The legislature year after year has different groups come out and are saying we need more money for schools, we need more money for prisons, we need more money for mental health. I'm just saying let's untie their hands, get more money back to where they can make strategic, important decisions about what's really important to the state of Oklahoma, where we want to spend our money. And to look at all those things.
Governor, over the last couple of years, you've made some progress in mental health funding.
Yes, sir.
Was long neglected, I think we would agree. Is there anything in the current proposals is across the board cuts that have already kicked in? Is there any mechanism that might protect some of that progress?
Well, we have made progress in mental health funding, and thank you for recognizing that, because I've had the opportunity to serve as a legislator a long time ago, and typically mental health was not one of those subjects that got funded. And people just said, well, people just need to work on whatever they have. It's an issue. But it is true that we have a lot of need for mental health services in our state. We see it in our prison systems. We see it, frankly, in our schools, some of our school children. We see it in our families, our communities. And so over the years, I talked about where we were as a state when I came into office with $2.03, and we grew it up to $534 or so million in our rainy day account. We had some of that money last year that we had to use, and we had a little bit of a shortfall. Still have a little bit of money left, but over the years, as I've been able to lower the unemployment rate, create jobs, I did put in $17 million more back into mental health services in our state. One of the things that you reported on as papers was the fact that when people would find somebody in mental health distress and they couldn't find an available bed somewhere in a crisis center, they were having to drive people all across the state, long hours. That didn't make any sense either. So we stood up more crisis intervention systems in our state, not as many as I want, but I moved the needle in the right direction to get those types of services. We also have worked very hard to establish a conversation and a relationship between our corrections department, our mental health agency, and even our Veterans Commission, to where they're all talking now. They're all trying to work together on just people who are in some type of dilemma that they need just a little bit of extra help. So mental health, I mean, when you have a budget shortfall as big as ours is, I've asked to do less harm to different agencies, and health agencies were those agencies that I tried not to give the bigger cut to.
Jeff Enid Eagle. Governor, with the recent surge in number of earthquakes in our state, about 3 earthquakes a day in Oklahoma, what additional actions will you ask of the Secretary Teague and state agencies to do really 3 things? 1, address the risk of further earthquake damage. 2, address the public fears that the big one is just right around the corner. And 3, clarify the rules for wastewater injection so that there can be continued exploration and production of energy without the fear of lawsuits and judges compromising their position.
And that's right on, Jeff. Thank you. Well, let me just say first of all that earthquakes and the damage they cause to homes, to businesses, possibly to infrastructure, to dams, roads, bridges, state office buildings, whatever it might be, that is a true concern. And so about a year and a half ago, I put together a coordinating council on seismic activity a year and a half ago to bring together our researchers at our universities, our U.S. Geological Survey, our corporation commissioners, geologists, the energy sector, environmentalists, a broad range of people to come together to talk about what's causing earthquakes, what can we do to mitigate further earthquakes if they're being caused by man or by an industry, and how we can address these issues. So we took that step a year and a half ago. About 6 months ago, I put in a council that would look at wastewater in general and what we do with water in our state. So that's in place too. I've been talking regularly with the corporation commissioners themselves. Certainly Secretary Teague has been to, I don't know how many meetings, probably close to 100 meetings with various groups, various organizations. The Corporation Commission has shut down wells. Corporation Commission has reduced volumes on wells. Corporation Commission has reduced the depth of some wells, depending upon their location, depending upon seismic activity in that area, depending upon fault lines that are known in those areas. And we do have fault lines in the state of Oklahoma. But we are trying to do, as quickly as possible, put different things in place to alleviate anything that may be caused by disposal wells and have been caused by disposal wells in different areas of the state, and to be able to provide the funding that they need. And so you heard me put out a press release and talk about before my State of the State, and I did it before my State of the State because I wanted it to be a standalone topic so that the people of Oklahoma know that we take earthquakes seriously and that we're going to do everything we can to try to mitigate any circumstances that might cause them. And so the week before I had my State of the State, I tapped into $1.4 million of funding out of the State Emergency Fund, which is used for tornadoes, floods, ice storms, whatever it might be. And I had, several weeks before, had asked the Corporation Commission to give me a list of what we can do funding-wise that would help them. So they had given me that list, and as soon as I got it, I signed an order transferring that money that would allow them to put in seismic monitoring equipment in different areas of the state, to be able to hire more geologists, to be able to hire more clerical staff, to be able to do more research, gather information, because there's a wide variety of opinions about what causes earthquakes in the state. There are lots of different theories and things that are out there. Now, one of the things I think it's interesting to note was that 2 years ago or so, certainly not since the beginning of my term in 2011, we weren't talking about earthquakes. So the Corporation Commission didn't have people on staff to the degree they need to have right now with the increase in earthquakes. They didn't have the different types of new technology, which our technology has not been sufficient at all to track current relevant data and information to make decisions quickly, especially as it relates to where a disposal well is and where an earthquake might have occurred. And we're literally having to have the few staff that they had, because it hasn't been a big issue in the past, to drive to these different locations to get the data and the information, then to come back to Oklahoma City to be able to look at their files and look through mapping and try to figure out if there was some correlation between what was going on in that area with disposal wells. Horrible system, but it just wasn't something we had to deal with to the extent we've had to deal with recently. So I think we're on the right course to give them the money they need to be able to buy computer systems that can give them real-time data, real-time analysis to where they can enter it in right away. Once something happens, they can look at it. They can have better what's called mapping, which they hadn't always had the best information on mapping, to be able to make sound scientific decisions about how we can lessen our earthquakes. Now that's important, because if you think the energy downturn right now is bad, just think of what it would be like if we didn't have any energy production in the state of Oklahoma. So there has to be a fine balance between the two, because we know that the energy sector is very important to Oklahoma's jobs, economy. Look at your papers, read the news, you can see different companies are laying off, some even laying off jobs, some even not related to energy, but they feel that trickle-down effect of the energy companies and their lack of revenue, whether it's bankers, which I talk to, whether it's real estate agents, whether it's different companies that do business with those energy companies. So there has to be a fine balance, but we have to make policy decisions based upon science and factual information and not on emotion and political rhetoric. I gave you a lot, didn't I?
For giving us your time today. We know public service is not easy, and we appreciate your leadership.
I appreciate you.
Service.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.